I didn't hesitate as I walked into the living room that night. It was late, and I had only gotten up to get a drink of water. I didn't expect anybody to be awake, neither my husband, Victor, who was abroad on business, nor my stepson, Alex, who was usually kept locked in his bed until midday. So when I spotted him seated on the couch, I froze. Not because he surprised me, but because of how he looked at me. His gaze was riveted on me, unrelenting. It took me a while to comprehend why. That is when I realized. My nightgown. It was quite frozen, especially in the dim light of the floor lamp beside him. The transparent cloth clung to my body, revealing far more than I had planned. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can keep giving you intriguing, genuine tales like these. Don't forget to watch this video till the conclusion. And like the video, because this narrative is going to be fascinating. Please click the like button to express your support. Alex. I managed to make my voice quieter than intended. He did not answer, his stare sweeping over me in a way that made my stomach knot. Not out of discomfort, but for far greater peril. I instantly grabbed the neckline of my gown, feeling exposed, but it was too late. The expression in his eyes spoke everything. I hurriedly turned and said something about needing water, but my palm trembled when I grasped the glass. His presence in the room lingered, silent but substantial. Looking back, I found him still observing me, his gaze opaque yet intense enough to leave me speechless. That was when everything changed. I suppose I should explain who I am and how I got to this place, where a single glance from my stepson may destabilize me. My name is Margaret, a name that seems too exquisite for the wreck I've created of my life. I'm 53 and married to Victor Hallworth, my second spouse. He is a dependable man, but that reliability does not extend to our personal lives. When I married him 10 years ago, I thought I'd finally found stability after years of struggle as a single mother. My first husband left me with little more than debt and heartache, but Victor provided the security I needed. However, security is not the same as love, and our marriage evolved over time into a partnership rather than a romance. Victor travels frequently, leaving me in a large empty house, surrounded by lovely furnishings but without warmth. I tried to fill the void with hobbies like gardening and painting, but even those activities felt like routine tasks. I've become an inconspicuous presence in my own home. That is, until Alex returned. He is now 24 years old, has recently graduated, and is returning home for the summer to find out what comes next. I had known him since he was a teenager, polite, calm, and usually a little distant. However, the Alex who returned this summer was different. He carries himself with fresh confidence, and his gaze is sharper than before. For the first time, I can't help but notice how much he has matured. I tell myself it's only a fleeting notion, but something changed that night in the living room when I noticed him staring at me like that. I went back to bed and lay awake for hours, repeating the event in my head. His gaze lingered, as did the tension in the air, and my body betrayed me with a heat I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was only a glimpse, a fleeting moment, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night marked the start of something I couldn't yet identify, something I wasn't willing to accept myself. Because when I awoke the next morning, the recollection of Alex's glare was not one I wanted to forget. It was something I wanted to experience again. Everything in the living room seemed crisper the next morning. I was acutely aware of Alex's presence in a manner that I hadn't been previously. His motions about the home, the sound of his voice over the phone, even the slight aroma of his perfume that remained in the hall had been enhanced. I spent the day trying to distract myself by washing the countertops and reorganizing the pantry, as if cleaning could erase the memory of his look. But by dinner time, I was a mess. Victor was still gone, leaving only Alex and myself to have an unpleasant supper. I avoided his gaze, focusing on my plate as if the roasted chicken deserved my whole attention. Alex finally broke the stillness, saying, "You've been quiet today." I looked up, surprised. His tone was easygoing, but his stare was everything but light. "Just tired," I responded, attempting a grin. "Are you sure that's all it is?" The question hovered in the air, weighty and sharp. I could feel my cheeks flushing, so I immediately glanced aside, pretending to concentrate on refilling my water glass. "You understand," he continued, his voice lower, regarding last night. My hand froze in the middle of a pour. "How about last night?" "I didn't want to make you uncomfortable," he explained, reclining back in his chair. "It's simply that I didn't expect to see you like that." "My pulse," he said, while leaning back in his chair. "Let's forget about that." "Can you?" he inquired, his voice low and almost daring. I couldn't respond. Instead, I stood quickly and gathered my plate. "I am going to tidy up." I could hear his chair scraping across the floor as he stood and followed me into the kitchen. "Margaret," he added, bringing his voice closer. I turned to face him and clutched the plate like a shield. "Alex, stop." He stopped, his expression inscrutable, then nodded and stepped back. "Okay, I'll stop for now." The quiet yet confident way he delivered his words sent shivers down my back. The days that followed necessitated a delicate equilibrium. Alex did not push, but he did not back down either. He was constantly present, hovering around the borders of my universe, observing and waiting. One evening, a storm blew in, taking out electricity. Victor was still in New York, and the mansion felt huge and empty as rain pelted the windows. I lit candles in the living room, but the pleasant warmth did little to alleviate the seething tension between Alex and myself. "You okay?" he inquired, entering the room. "I'm all right," I said, placing a candle on the coffee table. He sat on the sofa. His stance was easy, but his eyes were alert, following my every movement. "You don't appear to be all right." I sighed and sat down across from him. "The storm is all that exists. It makes the house seem lonely." He whispered softly, "You don't have to be lonely." My breath hitched, but I faked a laugh, shrugging aside his comments. "You've been reading too many dramatic novels." He did not laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, his elbows resting against his knees. "Margaret, we know what this is." My heart hammered. "What exactly are you talking about?" "This," he replied, waving between us. "I see the way you look at me, and I am sure you have seen how I look at you. I'm not a kid anymore." I stood suddenly. This chat is done. I turned to go, but he reached out and softly grabbed my wrist. The contact was electrical, sending a shock across my whole body. "Margaret," he whispered quietly, his eyes fixed on mine. "Do not walk away." For a while, I remained paralyzed, caught between every instinct screaming at me to escape and the obvious pull that held me in place. "Please," he said, his voice shaking just enough to reveal the vulnerability underneath his bravado. That was what broke me. I sat back down, my heart pounding as he released my wrist. The air between us was thick and packed with something I couldn't identify. I murmured, "This is dangerous." He said calmly, "Sometimes danger is worth it." The first time was hesitant, a clash of yearning and constraint that neither of us could bear any longer. It happened in the dim glow of candlelight while the storm outside muffled the sound of our breathing. When it was over, I lay in his arms, looking up at the flickering shadows on the ceiling. I whispered, "It will not happen again," I said, my voice quivering. "Why not?" he inquired, his tone calm yet strong. "Because it's wrong," I explained, drawing away. "Oh, because of Victor. Victor doesn't deserve you," he said, sitting up. "He does not see you, Margaret, but I do." His remarks pierced me, leaving me momentarily unable to respond. "I need time," I replied, eventually up and wrapping my robe around me. "Please." He nodded, his eyes keen. "Take as much time as you need. I am not going anywhere." But time didn't make things easier. If anything, it made everything worse. The tension between us built, affecting every contact. A brush of hands in the kitchen, a lingering gaze across the dinner table, the way his voice softened whenever he said my name. I attempted to maintain my distance, but it proved difficult. Alex had become the center of my thoughts, and every time I heard his footsteps in the corridor, my heart quickened. Then, one evening, Victor phoned. "I'll be home tomorrow," he added, his voice firm. "I've been away too long." The words drove a rush of terror through me. Victor's arrival would destroy the fragile universe Alex and I had created, pushing us back into our proper positions. After I hung up, I found Alex in the garden, his hands buried in the earth, tending to the flowers I'd planted months before. "He's coming back," I replied, my voice cracking. Alex looked up with an inscrutable face. "So what should we do?" "I'm not sure," I murmured. He stood, dusting the dirt off his hands as he approached. "We don't have to stop, Margaret. Just be cautious." "Careful, I say. We simply need to be careful. This is absurd. We're going to be caught." "Then let us get caught," he added in a defiant tone. I looked at him, shocked. "What exactly are you talking about?" "I am weary of faking," he replied. "I am weary of hiding. I don't care what others think." "But I do," I said, tears welling up in my eyes. "I can't lose everything, Alex. I cannot lose you." He grasped my face, his eyes ferocious. "You are not going to lose me, ever." His words were intended as a promise, but they seemed more like a warning. I couldn't sleep that night while lying in bed. Victor's impending homecoming loomed over me, and Alex's words rang through my memory. "We don't need to stop. We just have to be careful." But I knew deep down that being careful wouldn't be enough. The storm we'd begun was already too powerful to contain, and it was only a matter of time until it devoured us both. Victor came the next day with his customary aura of power, which permeated the home. He welcomed me with a short kiss on my cheek. He barely looked up from his phone and gave Alex a brief nod. "It's wonderful to have you back," I murmured, trying a grin as I accepted his luggage. He looked at me, his brow furrowed slightly. "You seem exhausted. Do you sleep well?" "I'm all right," I answered hastily, turning away before he noticed the blush on my neck. Alex said nothing. His eyes remained locked on Victor with a serenity that belied none of the tumult that had overtaken us in his absence. That evening, I was standing at the kitchen sink cleaning dishes while Victor worked at his office. Alex entered gently, his presence like a magnet that I couldn't resist. "You're going to break that plate," he warned calmly, pointing to the one I was holding too hard. I put it down, my hands shaking. "You must stop," I murmured, not daring to look at him. "What's the point?" He approached and inquired. "This, how you look at me, how you linger," I responded, finally turning to face him. Alex cocked his head, his gaze locked on me. "Would you like me to stop?" My breath caught. I didn't respond. His fingers brushed against mine as he reached for a towel, sending a thrill through me. "You do not have to keep faking, Margaret. Not with me." "Alex, we can't keep doing this," I replied, my voice shaking. "But we are," he explained, his voice firm, "and we will." As footsteps echoed down the corridor, I stepped back to put some distance between us. Victor arrived at the doorway, staring at us with a strange face. "Is everything okay in here?" he inquired in a casual but severe tone. "Fine," I said immediately, my voice too loud. Alex nodded, his face a flawless expression of serenity, just helping with the dishes. Victor stayed for a time, his eyes shifting between us before returning to his office. The tension in the house grew intolerable in the days that followed. Victor's presence served as a continual reminder of the border Alex and I had crossed, but it also enhanced the excitement of every stolen gaze and whispered word between us. One evening, Victor mentioned that he had brought an old buddy to supper. He poured himself a glass of scotch and introduced himself as David Caldwell. "Do you remember him, Margaret?" I nodded, but the name made me feel uneasy. David was an investigator, sharp, clever, and way too perceptive for my tastes. When he came, his handshake was solid, and his grin was pleasant yet discerning. As we sat down to supper, I felt his attention on me many times, lingering just a little too long. David looked around and commented, "This is quite the house." Victor always had a penchant for the finest things. Victor chuckled. "It helps to have a woman who understands how to make a place seem like home." I faked a grin, my stomach tightening as David moved his eyes to Alex. "And you?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "What are your plans, Alex? Are you following in your father's footsteps?" Alex shrugged in a controlled tone. "I am still finding things out." David's smile did not reach his eyes. "Smart. There's no need to hurry into anything." The remainder of the evening was unremarkable, but I couldn't escape the sense that David was watching me, studying the dynamics of our home with such accuracy that my skin crawled. That night, I discovered Alex waiting for me in the garden, his silhouette just discernible in the moonlight. "He knows something," I muttered as I wrapped my arms around myself. "David?" Alex asked in a calm tone. I nodded. I can sense it by the way he stares at us. It appears like he is putting parts together. "Allow him," Alex replied, moving closer. "He does not have anything on us." "But what if he discovers something?" I muttered, my voice shaking. "We'll handle it together," Alex replied, caressing my face with his fingers. The following day, the course of events unexpectedly changed. I was in the study, going through a stack of mail, when I came across an envelope addressed to me in unusual handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a written note. "I understand what you've been doing. Meet me at the restaurant on the 5th at 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone." My hands trembled as I reread the message. It was not signed, but I didn't need to know the sender's identity. Something wasn't right. Victor's words shocked me, so I hastily folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket. "No, nothing," I said, trying a grin. That evening, I informed Victor that I was meeting a buddy for coffee. He hardly looked up from his laptop as I left, my heart beating as I walked to the diner. Sophie was waiting for me in a corner booth, her face smug as I took the seat across from her. "You've been busy," she said, stirring her coffee. "What do you want?" I asked, getting right to the subject. She grinned and leaned back in her chair. "Money, of course, enough to make me forget all I've seen." I tightened my hands beneath the table. "You do not have any proof, don't I?" she remarked, taking out her phone. My blood raced cold as she tapped the tablet and showed me a blurry snapshot of Alex and me in the garden, his fingers on my cheek. "Delete it," I murmured, my voice cracking. "Not until I get what I want," she said. 50,000 at the end of the week. "I don't have that much money," I said, my mind racing. "Then sort it out," she added, getting up and returning her phone to her handbag. "Because if you don't, Victor will know first." When I informed Alex about the meeting, he was furious. He paced the room and muttered, "She's bluffing." I responded with a shaking voice, She has photos, and she's not lying, Alex. She is serious. Then we'll pay her, he explained. With what? I inquired. I do not have access to that type of money, and neither do you. His jaw tensed and his eyes darkened. Then we'll find another solution. Over the next 3 days, the home became increasingly tense. Victor appeared unconcerned, but David's presence loomed like a thundercloud. One afternoon, I overheard David and Victor conversing in the study. David saw something wrong with Alex. If I were in your shoes, I would closely monitor him. What are you trying to get at? Victor asked. His tone was suspicious. David hesitated. Just a sensation. Call it professional intuition. That night, Alex entered my room, his countenance stern. He remarked, "We can't keep this up." "What do you mean?" I inquired, my heart sinking. "This house, this circumstance, is too risky," he explained. "We need to go." "Leave?" I repeated, astonished. He nodded. "It's just you and me. We can travel far away and start afresh." "Alex, that is insane," I said. "We can't simply disappear. What's insane is remaining here, pretending everything is positive when it isn't," he said, his voice rising. I shook my head, tears filling my eyes. "Alex, I can't just walk away from Victor, from this life." "Do you adore him?" Alex interrupted with a harsh tone. I froze. "That's what I thought," he said, his voice softening. "Margaret, I adore you. I can't take the notion of losing you." His words shattered something within me, and I drew him into an embrace, clinging to him as if he were the only thing holding me afloat. But even as I held him, a niggling voice in the back of my mind reminded me that this wasn't over. The storm was still approaching, and when it arrived, it would leave nothing undamaged. The next day, everything began to crumble faster than I could control it. Alex's desire to go together played in my head, but no matter how much I wanted to give in, the idea of fleeing seemed unattainable. Victor remained inattentive, engrossed in his job, but David's presence lingered like a shadow, and Sophie's demands became increasingly intense. That morning, while I sipped my coffee in the kitchen, Victor entered, dressed sharper than usual in a cut blue suit. "I'll be gone most of the day," he explained, scanning through emails on his phone. "What's happening?" I inquired, attempting to keep my tone casual. He said, glancing up quickly, "I have a meeting downtown. David is going with me. Something about loose endings." The words "loose ends" gave me a chill. "What type of loose ends?" Victor shrugged. "Nothing to worry about, just business." But when he kissed my cheek and walked out the door, I couldn't escape the suspicion that he wasn't telling me the full story. By mid-afternoon, my anxiety had skyrocketed. Alex was gone, presumably trying to figure out how to deal with Sophie, and I was left alone in the home with nothing but my thoughts. I walked the living room, my thoughts racing with options. Then the doorbell rang. Sophie stood there when I opened it, arms crossed and a smug grin on her face. "You're late," she murmured, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "What exactly are you talking about?" I inquired, my voice wavering. "The money," she said, turning to face me. "I told you I needed it by today." "I told you I didn't have that much money," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "That's bad," she continued, taking out her phone since Victor might be interested in seeing them. She held up the screen, and it appeared again. The photograph of Alex and me in the yard is vivid enough to remove any doubt about what was going on between us. "Sophie, please," I said, my voice cracking. "You don't need to do this." "Oh, but I do," she said, her tone scornful. "Unless, of course, you suddenly realize how to fulfill my price." Before I could react, the front door opened, and Alex entered. When he noticed Sophie, he froze, and his eyes narrowed. "What's happening?" he inquired, his voice low and threatening. Sophie smirked as she continued, "Just having a little chat with your stepmother." Alex stepped forward, his stance tight. "You should depart." "Not until I receive what I came for," she explained, holding out her phone. Alex's expression intensified, and before I could intervene, he grabbed the phone from her fingers. Sophie shrieked, grasping for it, but Alex kept it out of her reach. "This is over now," he murmured, his voice frigid. "Do you suppose that is my only copy?" She sneered. Alex said, "If you say anything about this to anyone, I'll make sure you regret it." Sophie's eyes opened briefly, but she immediately recovered, and her grin returned. She remarked, "Big talk. Let's see if you can back it up." She rushed out and slammed the door behind her. "She won't stop," I replied, my voice trembling. "She will," Alex answered, his voice steely. "I'll make sure of that." Later that night, I heard Victor on the phone in his study. His voice was low and anxious. "David was getting too near," he added. "We must manage the situation discreetly, leaving no unresolved issues." The statement sent shudders down my spine. I moved closer to the door, straining to hear. "If it comes down to it," Victor said, "we may have to break relations completely. You know what I mean?" My stomach turned. He was not simply talking about suppressing David. He was talking about killing him. Later that night, I spotted Alex in the garden, pacing along the property's boundary. I told him all I heard, my voice quivering as I repeated Victor's comments. "Victor is plotting something dangerous." Alex's expression clouded. "We have to stop him." "How?" I inquired, my voice cracking. I murmured, "He has all the power. He has money and contacts. He doesn't have you," Alex said, his voice hard, "and this is what scares him." The next morning, the situation escalated. I awoke to the sound of agitated voices emanating from the study. Alex and Victor were bickering, their words muted, but my heart pounded as I drew closer while remaining out of sight. Victor spat. "You're a selfish, reckless bastard. You have compromised all I have accomplished." "And you're a liar and a coward," Alex responded. "You've been using Margaret to hide your crimes, and I'm not going to let you take her down with you." Victor's voice lowered, icy and frightening. "What are you planning to do, Alex?" "Run to the cops. They will laugh you out of the station. You're just a spoiled child who doesn't know his position." "Perhaps not," Alex said, his voice calm, "but I know enough to devastate you." The room became silent, and I held my breath, scared of what would come next. Finally, Victor spoke, his voice strangely calm. "If you want to ruin me, go ahead. But remember this, I'll bring Margaret down with me. She'll lose all she's worked for and built. Would you truly want it on your conscience?" I entered the room before Alex could react, my voice trembling. "Stop, both of you." They turned to me, their expressions strained and furious. "This has gone too far," I murmured as my chest tightened. "Victor, if you truly care about me, you will stop this. Let it go." Victor laughed cruelly. "Concerned about you? Don't kid yourself, Margaret. You are merely another player in this game." Alex approached him. His fists tightened, but I moved in between them. "Enough," I shouted out. "I refuse to let you ruin each other." Victor scoffed. "Do you believe you can stop this?" It is now too late. Later that evening, Alex and I reached a conclusion. "We must leave," he continued, his voice strong. "There is no other way." I nodded, my heart weary. "But what about Victor?" I questioned. "He will come after us." "Allow him," Alex said. "We'll disappear. He will be unable to touch us." We packed quickly, taking only what we needed, but the sound of a car driving into the driveway halted us as we were leaving. Victor walked out, his face contorted with hatred, and marched toward us. "Going somewhere?" he inquired, his tone icy. "Let us go, Victor," I pleaded, my voice shaking. He shook his head, laughing bitterly. "You think you can simply walk away from this? From me?" Alex stepped forward, his stance tight. "We're finished, Victor. You have lost." "Have I?" Victor spoke, his gaze turning to mine. "You believe he can protect you, Margaret. He's a boy pretending to be a guy. He will forsake you the moment things go rough." "That's it," Alex replied, his voice calm. Victor scoffed. "You are nothing, Alex, and she will realize it soon enough." Before Victor could respond, Alex grabbed my hand and drew me toward the automobile. "We are leaving," he said. Victor did not stop us. He simply stood there, his demeanor gloomy and victorious, as if he had already won. We traveled for hours together, the tension thick and heavy. I couldn't shake the sensation that Victor wasn't finished, and that he'd find a way to entangle us again in his web. As we arrived at a quiet hotel on the outskirts of a tiny town, Alex looked at me seriously. "We'll work it out," he added quietly. I nodded, but the weight of all we'd left behind weighed hard against my chest. In the end, we were not truly free. Victor's threat hovered over all we attempted to construct. But when Alex drew me into his arms that night, murmuring promises of a future in which we might finally be happy, I allowed myself to think, if only for a minute, that we could escape our history. As I sat on the side of the bed, looking at the tacky, flowery wallpaper, the room was silent except for the gentle hum of the motel's air conditioner. Alex stood near the window. He peeked through the slats every few minutes, as if Victor might emerge at any moment. "We cannot stay here indefinitely," I remarked, breaking the stillness. "I understand," Alex responded, his voice tense. He had been calm, even stubborn, during the journey, but now I could see the cracks beginning to appear, the tightness in his shoulders, and the way his jaw clenched every time he looked outside. It was inevitable that the magnitude of our achievements would eventually overwhelm him. "We need a strategy," I murmured, my voice more composed than I felt. Alex turned to face me with a harsh gaze. "The idea is to keep going and remain ahead of him." "Do you think Victor would simply let this go?" I questioned, rising up to confront him. "You heard what he said," Alex responded. "He will come after us. Let him." "Alex," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "We can't continue to live this way forever." "We don't have a choice," he explained, his voice cracking. The breaking point occurred 3 days later. We were on the road, going west toward a place Alex described as tiny enough to vanish in, when we saw the automobile behind us. It had been following us for miles, remaining just far enough behind to arouse suspicion, but neither of us could shake the uneasy feeling that we were being watched. Alex confirmed, his hands grasping the steering wheel fiercely. "Are you certain?" I inquired, my voice wavering. Alex didn't respond. Instead, he chose the next exit, weaving down side streets, attempting to lose our tail, but the automobile remained behind us, its headlights flashing in the rear-view mirror. "Hold on," Alex urged, his voice strained as he took a sudden curve into a dirt road. The automobile behind us paused for a time before continuing, its tires throwing up dust as it closed the gap between us. "Alex, what are you doing?" I inquired, worried swelling in my chest. "I'm ending this," he said, his voice firm. He pulled the automobile to a quick halt, throwing it into the park before leaving. "Stay here," he ordered, his tone leaving no space for disagreement. I saw him approach the other car with his shoulders set and fists clenched. Victor unlocked the driver's door and got out, his face contorted with wrath. "You have some nerve," Victor remarked, his voice frigid. "This is the end." Alex said nothing. He moved closer, his posture solid. He repeated, This ends now." Victor laughed cruelly. "You believe you can threaten me? You don't know who you're dealing with." "I'm not frightened of you," Alex added, moving closer. "You should be," Victor responded, drawing a revolver from his coat. My breath froze in my throat as I jumped out of the car, my heart racing. "Victor, stop," I begged, my voice trembling. He turned to me, his gaze narrowing. "It is your fault, Margaret. You caused this mess." "Put down the gun," I said, my voice trembling. "Why should I?" he inquired in a sarcastic tone. "You have already ruined everything. Why not complete the job?" Alex lunged at him, snatching the revolver. A shot boomed out, booming along the vacant road. For a little moment, everything stopped. Victor lurched back, gripping his side as blood soaked through his shirt. Alex stood still, the rifle in his hands, and his face blanched. I raced to Victor, my hand trembling as I attempted to stop the bleeding. "Why?" he muttered, his voice faint. "Why him?" I couldn't respond. Alex lowered the revolver, his chest heaving as he looked at Victor. "He will survive," he whispered finally, his voice empty. "We need to go." I nodded, tears flowing down my cheeks as I assisted him to his feet. We did not remain to witness what occurred next. We did not stop. We just kept driving, facing an unknown future. And, for the first time, I hoped that we might be able to leave. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't finished. Not yet. We traveled all night, the stillness between us suffocating. Neither of us knew what to say, but with each mile, we left more of our previous lives behind. The only thing that kept us going was our pledge to each other that we would be together no matter what. As morning came, we drew into a little village. It seemed like a fresh start, but I couldn't escape the sense that the past was still hunting us. Alex and I entered a diner to buy some dinner. As we ate, we maintained silence. Neither of us knew what the future held. Then Alex's phone vibrated. He gazed at the TV, his face deepening. "It is Victor," he said. I froze. "He says he's coming after us," Alex said, his voice tense. "He won't stop until we go back where we belong." I gazed at Alex, my heart pounding. The weight of our accomplishments weighed heavily on my chest. "What happens now?" I whispered. "We'll keep moving," Alex stated firmly. "We do not stop. We cannot." I nodded, the weight of the situation hitting on me once more. But when Alex's hand found mine beneath the table, I knew we couldn't stop. Whatever happened next had to remain together, and there was no going back.